I have a pretty major dilemma. You see, I love women in armor, as we all do, of course. And when I like something, I want to become that thing. So for a long time, I've wanted to make myself a set of armor that I can wear to like Ren fairs and events and the grocery store. But here's my dilemma. I also like to be comfortable. I mean, like right now, I'm filming this intro from the waist up because I want to maintain the illusion of someone who lounges about while dressed as some sort of royal courtier, but in reality, I'm sitting on my bed and wearing sweatpants. Sorry to spoil the magic there. So you see my conflict. Plate armor and chainmail, and more realistically EVA foam and warbler, are just not materials that are very conducive to my slugly lifestyle. So I've been thinking of ways that I can make armor out of something more comfortable. The first thing that comes to mind for me is fabric. You just have to make it more sturdy and reinforced to get that proper shape. And when I think sturdy, reinforced fabric garment, I think corsets. While the popular modern conception of a steel bone, tight-laced corset doesn't sound very comfortable, corsets and similar support garments throughout history have used a myriad of different methods and materials that are relatively soft and flexible while still creating a sturdy garment. So today I'm going to use corsetry techniques to create a full set of fantasy armor that is just as suited for the field of battle as it is for a Netflix binge. Let's talk design. So fabric armor is definitely a real thing throughout history. From the medieval European gambeson, to the ancient Greek linothorax, to the Mesoamerican ichkahuipili, to modern examples like fencing gear and Kevlar body armor. Those are real-world examples of fabric being used to create protective armor pieces. That's not really what I'm planning on making today. This isn't meant to be like an actual protective garment. It's just to look cool. So I'm not really pulling from those things for this design. I'm more so pulling from the armor you would think of on like a stereotypical knight, the shiny silver plate and chainmail, along with a heavy dose of fantasy nonsense, of course. In terms of corsetry techniques, I've been looking more so at corset adjacent things that aren't actually corsets, like stays and jumps. In particular, looking at corded stays. I've been really interested in this technique for a while. I think it creates a really cool texture and there's a lot of opportunities to make a lot of really interesting patterns. So I've done several samples and tried a bunch of different fabrics. So I think I have a strategy in mind for that. I want to start with the corset as the first armor piece. I've already draped a pattern, made a mock-up, and then worked out the pattern of the cording that I want to do. But before I start working on the corset, I should talk about what's going under the corset, because I've actually already finished that part. So I really wanted to have the look of like a chainmail shirt under pieces of plate armor. I really like that. But obviously I wanted something, you know, lighter and more comfortable than chainmail. So I knit a chainmail sweater to go under as a base layer. So I used a really lightweight fine yarn. It's lace weight bamboo viscose. I worked with it held double to be a bit heavier, but then sized up a few sizes on the needles to get like a more open meshy knit to get more of that chainmail look. I decided to use the bamboo viscose yarn, firstly because it's really lightweight and breathable, and that's really what I want to have with the base layer underneath all of this. But secondly, it has this really nice shininess to it, sort of all over pearly shininess that really resembles metal. For this sweater, I knit just a very basic raglan and stockinette stitch with a little bit of ribbing at the hem, collar, and cuffs. I used this online raglan sweater calculator where you can just input your measurements and how you want the sweater to fit, and it works out how many stitches to cast on, how often you should increase, when to split for the sleeves. I also learned how to use double point needles for this, which I always thought were super scary looking, but they're actually really easy to use, and I liked using them on the sleeves way more than doing magic loop. Though using double pointed needles with a yarn that's very light and slippery and has zero structure might not have been the best choice for a first attempt. I kept getting ladders between the columns of stitches when I went from one needle to the next from the weight of the needles pulling the stitches apart, but I was able to get rid of most of this with blocking. Blocking is always a process for me. For the normal reasons, you know, you have to be careful handling the wet knit fabric, arranging it and pinning it in place takes a long time, but also my cat really likes to chew on my foam blocking mats, so I have to take precautions.
I don't think so. No, 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 no.
But with the chainmail sweater safely out to dry, I can move forward with the corset. As I said earlier, I had already made a mock-up and marked out the cording channels. Marking the channels was quite a process since I wanted them to go up from the center front bottom edge, then make a 90-degree turn over the bust and continue straight to the center back. I really wanted these to be all straight parallel lines, but of course, corsets have curves, and the lines aren't all perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal. But once I had worked all that out, I transferred those markings onto water-soluble stabilizer, since my usual heat erase marking pens tended to bleed and fade on the poly satin that I wanted to use. With the channel markings transferred, I took apart my mock-up, transferred the pattern to paper, and cut all the pieces out of the shiny silver satin and assembled them. I also cut and assembled another layer out of quilting cotton. I basted together both layers of fabric and the wash-away stabilizer, then I could begin sewing the channels. I just followed the lines I marked out and went really slowly on the curves to try and get smooth lines. I developed a nice little rat tail of thread ends from this process. I didn't bother to tie off all the ends since they would end up in the seam allowance, and there were a billion of them, but I did make sure to pull them all to the wrong side of the fabric and trim them down. So I've got all the cording channels stitched in, which went a lot faster than I was expecting. I thought it was going to take me like a day minimum. I thought I was gonna have to do the curved portions of the channels by hand. I didn't think I could get a clean seam by machine on that based on my samples that I did. I had to take it really slow. I was doing like a stitch and then lifting the presser foot and turning the work and then doing another stitch. But yeah, the channels are all stitched in. So next I'm going to remove my basting stitches and then wash away the stabilizer. And while it's drying, I'm gonna go ahead and make like a stability layer. I've got this random piece of canvas lying around. It's kind of old. It does have a pea stain on it, but I think it'll be okay. It's also got a small child with a giant sunflower. I think they're like iron-on transfers. I don't know what they're from. So hopefully by the time the canvas layer is done, the first piece will be dry and I can start adding in the cording. For the cording, I used worsted weight cotton yarn and did 3 to 4 strands per channel. Feeding the yarn into the channels was the most difficult part of the process since the channels were pretty tight and had a curve that I had to get around. The first few channels I did had pretty wide curves, so I was able to use a tapestry needle for those. But as the curves got tighter, there wasn't enough room to maneuver the needle through, so then I tried taping the yarn to an interchangeable knitting needle cord and feeding that through the channels, which kind of worked, but not really. Ultimately, I found the best method was to take a long piece of wire, fold it in half, and use it basically the same way you use a needle threader. I would feed the wire all the way through the channel, then thread the yarn through the loop at the folded end of the wire, and then pull the wire out from the other end, which would pull the yarn through the channel. Okay, so I've got half of the cording in. This side is all corded, this side is not. It's got big bullet bra energy. It's crazy how much the cording adds to the shape, because like this side you can see it's like really wrinkled and collapsing and has absolutely no structure, and this side is just so much smoother. So yeah, I'm gonna finish putting the cording in this side and then I can start putting the whole thing together. So let's go. Once all the cording was in, I trimmed away the excess yarn and attached the canvas layer by hand, sewing into the channel seams so the stitches wouldn't be visible from the outside. I added boning channels by machine at the center back to support the eyelets that would go there eventually, and then turned the edges of the satin over and whip stitched them down to the canvas. I added some hand-stitched eyelets to the center back, and that finished off the first piece of this armor set. So the next piece I'm going to work on is the hip armor piece. I don't know what it's called. It's a tasset. They are tassets. 2 tassets? Hip armor. I'm gonna call it the hip armor. So I think these can be a lot less structured than the corset because it doesn't need to like stay up and have a shape. It's gonna kind of go on like a skirt. I'm gonna do like 3 pieces for each hip that layer on top of each other, and I'll probably just do it as 2 layers of the satin since I think you'll be able to kind of see some of the underside when it moves. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut out my fabric and do some more cording. I cut and sewed together 2 layers of the silver satin for each tasset piece, and then turned and pressed them right side out. Then I could sew the cording channels. These were much simpler to sew than the ones for the corset. Since these were flat pieces, all the channels could be a consistent width, so I just used the presser foot as a guide to follow the previous line of stitching, switching to the zipper foot and adjusting the needle position as needed to make thicker or thinner channels to create different patterns. Then I could add in the cording. I had thought the curved parts of the corset channels were annoying to get the yarn through, but I hadn't even considered that the hip armor had corners to get around. Acute angle corners. It took a lot of finagling and a little seam unpicking, but I got all the channels corded, the edges cleaned up, some interfacing applied to some uncorded areas, and everything was ready for assembly. I sewed together 3 pieces along the top edge to create 2 stacks, then sewed those 2 stacks together to make the center back. Then I cut a simple waistband, attached it to the raw edge of the tassets, and then finished them off with a hook and bar closure at the center front. Next I moved on to the gorget. I had made a pattern for this when I mocked up the corset, so I used that to cut my satin and cotton layers. I also wanted this to have a stand collar, which is something I've had difficulty drafting in the past, but I found a really clear and helpful tutorial on YouTube, which I'll have linked down below in the description. I've tried to follow other tutorials before and always got lost, but this one was super easy and I ended up with a really well-fitting stand collar, so I highly recommend it. With the collar assembled, I did the same for the rest of the pieces and then bag lined the satin with the quilting cotton. Then I could sew more channels and add in more cording, with more corners, of course. With all the cording in, I just needed to finish the edges, attach the collar to the rest of the gorget, and then add a snap at the center back. Okay, so I'm moving on to working on the pauldrons, the shoulder pieces. I think also the knee pieces, because I think those are going to end up being pretty much the same thing, so I might as well just go ahead and do them all at the same time, get them all out of the way. So I did a little tape pattern on my shoulder, and I've done some mocking up and some testing, tried a few different iterations, and I think I've worked out the pattern that I want to do, so I'm going to go ahead and cut out all my fabric and then get started sewing them together. Each shoulder and knee piece was basically a square cut diagonally into quadrants, with the edges curved to create a more dome-like shape when assembled. I wanted a 4-pointed star at the center of each one with radiating lines, so I sewed curved channels onto each quadrant individually, then assembled them into squares, leaving the outer edges unfinished so the channels were open for me to add in the cording. I bag-lined each piece with more cotton to hide all the raw edges, turned them right side out, and then they just needed an elastic strap and they were done. The last pieces for this set that I needed to make were the arm and leg pieces, which were all fairly simple in design, basically just trapezoids with fancy edges, but ended up taking the longest. There are 8 pieces in total, 2 for each arm and leg, and I also decided to do these thin curved channels across the full surface of all of the pieces. I spent about 3 days on all of these, but by this point I think you get the process. Layer of cotton, layer of satin, sew channels, add cording, finish edges, repeat until the heat death of the universe. I do want to point out one important detail about this whole process, and that is that adding cording to fabric causes it to shrink. The fabric has to move to accommodate the space taken up by the cording, so the width shrinks. You can make swatches and do the math to work out how much it will shrink and modify your pattern pieces accordingly if you need them to be the exact right size, but everything I made could close with a lacing gap or an overlap, so nothing had to be that precise. Plus, I had a lot of these 90-degree turns, so I had both vertical and horizontal cording on a single piece, meaning it shrunk in multiple dimensions, and I didn't want to do that math, so I accepted there would be lacing gaps and just focused on sewing parallel lines until I went cross-eyed. For the leg and arm pieces, I made lacing loops by basically just doing a really spaced out running stitch with embroidery floss, and then laced them up with elastic cord to make them easy to get on and off. With all the laces in, the armor set was finally done, but what is a lady knight without her sword? Luckily, I had been making one out of cardboard at the same time I had been building my armor, and by this point it had actually been finished for several days. So let's go back a couple weeks so I can show you how I did that. I wanted to make this sword out of stuff that I already had on hand to save on both time and money. I used PVC pipe as the internal structure, but I didn't have a single piece that was long enough, so I attached 2 shorter pieces by hot gluing some rolled up cardboard into both pieces. I then cut out the least crinkled part of this curtain rod box to use for the blade. I scored a channel down the center of each half of the cardboard so it could be folded into a beveled shape, and then closed the blade around the PVC pipe using masking tape. I used thinner cardboard from cereal boxes to create the star-shaped hilt, making sure to leave a flat spot at the center so I could place a gemstone there later. I covered the open end of the PVC pipe with this little plastic bit that was also packaging from the curtain rod. Then I applied several coats of glossy Mod Podge to prep the sword for paint. The glossy base will help to make the metallic paint shinier. I used Mod Podge straight from the bottle at first, then started watering it down to reduce brush strokes, but I wish I'd been thinning it from the beginning. It ended up being a little too streaky. Once the Mod Podge had dried thoroughly, I masked off the blade and spray painted the hilt gold. When that had dried, I masked off the hilt and then spray painted the blade silver. While I let that dry, I started prepping the gemstones for the hilt. These were the one thing I had to buy for this sword, and it's probably not what you're expecting, unless you're expecting giant googly eyes. I trimmed down the edges and removed the googly from the eye, so it wouldn't be rattling around in there, and then painted them with green nail polish. Once that had dried, I could glue them both to the hilt of the sword, and the entire project was done, and we could finally take a look at the finished product. stick my phone in my thigh armor. That's handy. So that is it. The armor is all done. I'm super happy with how it all came out. I really love the look of the cording. I think it came out so nice. There's a little bit of wrinkling and bubbling here and there, but I think that just has to do with the way I laid out the cording. I don't really know how else I could have avoided it. There is a little bit of fit issues here and there. The leg pieces in particular kind of like to start working their way down, but I think I just need to do a little bit of tweaking here and there, and then everything will fit pretty perfectly. And I do have a little announcement right here at the end of the video. I am starting a Patreon. There's gonna be early access to videos, behind the scene looks at upcoming projects. I'm planning on making patterns for some of my projects like my house bag and a few other things, and having those available on Patreon as well. So if you're interested, that'll be linked below. Please don't feel obligated to join at all. I know times are really tough for everybody, and just by watching these videos, you are supporting me, and that means so much to me. If you would like to throw a couple extra dollars my way, I would greatly appreciate it, and it would go a long way towards materials for projects and investing in better filming equipment and just overall improving the channel. Nothing is going to change on the channel with the addition of the Patreon. I'm still planning on uploading every other week with my same whatever this is. The Patreon's just going to be an extra way to support my work for anyone who might be interested. So that will be linked below. Thank you in advance for checking that out, and thank you for watching this video. Like I said, just watching these videos really does help me out. Let me know what you think about this project down in the comments. Click whatever buttons you feel like clicking, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!